Hello and welcome to the Priggya Arora Show, where we discuss law, innovation, and entrepreneurship with people who have been there and done that. My name is Priggya Arora, founder of PA Legal, an intellectual property law firm in India. Today we have a special guest, Mr. Donal O'Connell. He is the founder of Chawton Innovation Services from UK, and we'll be discussing about trade secrets. Welcome, Donald, on the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So, Donald, we'll start with your story and how did you enter into the field of IP and how did you become the person you are today? I know it had been a very long journey and you have been in this field since a long, long time, but something you can share about around that.
Yes, I should start by saying I'm not an attorney. My background is an engineer and worked for companies like Atari and Philips and Nokia and went up the traditional engineering career ladder. But I spent some time in the States, particularly in Texas, and as many people in IP know, Texas is a litigious hotbed when it comes to IP. So I kept getting dragged into IP issues and working with the IP department and getting involved in IP disputes. So I moved sideways, became director of IP at Nokia for 7 years. So managed an in-house IP department, which was a tremendous education and a great development. And then left in 2009 to set up my own company, which focuses on education, a little bit of consultancy, and also using technology to help IP be more efficient and effective. So yeah, it's been a long journey, probably 20 plus years in IP now.
Yeah. So, Donald, I was just getting to know you and I got to know that your company is also dealing with education and it is also focused on education a lot. I don't think much companies do that. So how did you enter into this field and thought of promoting IP or entering into the field of education?
Well, first of all, I had been at the receiving end myself. So when I was an engineer, I experienced having to attend IP training. So I saw the difficulties and the challenges for an IP person to communicate to an engineering group who may not be so interested in sitting through IP education. Then, when I was director of IP at Nokia, I had a responsibility to educate a large multinational, and I saw the challenges when you are, we had a head count at 120,000 people at its peak. So how do you educate people about IP? Particularly when you have different people inside an organization, engineers, marketing, service, maintenance, distribution, and so forth. What do you need to teach them, and how do you teach them, and how do you make sure it's interesting, and how do you make sure it's engaging? So that was probably my initial interaction with education. I teach a little bit at some universities, so I also saw the challenges with teaching engineering students or medical students about IP. And of course, when you're dealing with students, it's different than when you're dealing with employees. Again, you get a very different interaction, and but it's all a learning process. And then I suppose with COVID, we have seen a switch to e-learning. People working from home, people not willing to attend classroom training, people not willing to travel. So how do you embrace technology to leverage, for example, e-learning management systems? So how do you use, for example, video or online quizzes or interactive technology to get people to learn about IP? Because clearly we have to teach people about IP. There is a lot of misunderstanding. Well, first of all, there's a lot of people who don't understand it at all. Secondly, there are people who think they understand it, but they have the wrong understanding about IP. And IP is complex, unfortunately. It's not a simple topic. There are different forms, different processes, different models that have to be understood. And then how do you link it to innovation and creativity? So what's the links? So why are you being taught about it? So what? So I think education is a fascinating subject, but I think IP community have to do a lot more. We're not doing enough, and we're not doing it well enough. And we know this from research that we have to do a better job.
Correct. I think it is so important to especially every engineering and medical student should know about how to protect whatever they develop. And uh, it is very, really important and need of the art.
Yeah. And of course,
So,
it's also changing. IP isn't static; it
correct.
moves. So just when you think you understand it, you didn't realize, well, actually something is changing. So it is a fascinating subject.
And you have seen all of it. I'm sure 20 years ago, the laws were very, very different than they are now. The technology was very, very different than it is now.
Yep, yep. And the subject we're going to talk about, trade secrets, were very, very different.
Yeah.
Remember, trade secrets were probably the neglected stepchild of IP 20 years ago. Nobody really thought about it. And it's amazing how that has changed in a very short period of time to now become a much more important form of IP.
Correct. So, Donald, we'll start with you. How would a layman understand trade secrets? Like, if a general person, a student, comes to you and asks you, "What is a trade secret?" So, how do you answer that question?
Well, the law differs a little bit from country to country, but in general,
Right.
the definition is fairly simple and uniform across locations. So it is business information that meets three requirements. So first of all, it's business information that is secret,
Yeah.
that has value, and you've taken reasonable steps to protect. So
Correct.
it is very different, for example, compared to patents or trademarks or whatever. It has got a relatively simple definition. Um, However, that's often misunderstood. You need to delve a little bit deeper. So, like, what does that actually mean in practice? Well, obviously, it means that the information cannot be in the public domain. If I can read on Google this information, or I can take up a newspaper and read it, or if I can go into a library and find the book that has the information, then it's not secret. So
Yeah.
it can't be in the public domain, and it can't be easily accessible. Um, you've got to limit access. If half of India knows the information, then it's not a trade secret.
Definitely.
So you've got to limit it. Now, the law doesn't say how many people is okay. It doesn't say that
Yeah.
4 people is okay, but 5 people is too many. You've
Yeah.
got to think about it on a case by case basis. So you've got to think, well, do the people who have access to it, is there a business reason for them having access? That's probably okay. But if you have lots of people with access to the information who don't need the access, then you've got a problem. So you've got to limit access.
Correct.
It's got to have value. But again, the law doesn't say that $2 isn't enough, but $3 value is good enough. There's no definition in the law as to what is the sufficient value. It's a case by case basis. So the value of a trade secret, for example, to a small startup company might be very different to the value of a trade secret to a large multinational like IBM or Toyota or so forth. So
Correct.
but it has to have value to the business
Correct.
in some way, shape, or form. It's got to be value. It could be that it gives you a competitive advantage, it gives you a cost advantage, it allows you to be more efficient. So it has to have value in some way, shape, or form.
Correct.
And then you've got to protect it. So you've got to protect it. If you don't protect it, then it's not a trade secret.
Yes.
But again, the law isn't so clear. So it doesn't require you to become Fort Knox, like the famous place in the US, which is locked down with soldiers and armory and so forth. So you've got to take reasonable protection. So, but again, it means you've got to think about, well, what sort of administrative, legal, or technical measures might I take to protect it? So it's a simple definition, but when you start examining the different things, you've suddenly got to think about, okay, well, this is a little bit more challenging. I would also perhaps, if the person was asking me, I would also clarify that it's an unregistered form of IP.
Yes.
And that's an important thing to note. So with patents and trademarks, you apply to the relevant intellectual property office in whichever jurisdiction you're involved. So if you're in India, you'd go to the patent office in India for a patent, or you'd go to the trademark office. With trade secrets, there's no interaction with the IP office, none whatsoever. You don't go knock on their door and say, I'd like to register my trade secret. How much do I pay you? Can you give me some paperwork and so forth? It's up to you internally to look after your trade secrets. It's an unregistered And that can be challenging for companies because with patents, you in a sense are given the process by the government or by your IP firm. They tell you, well, you've got to draft it, you've got to file it, you've got to prosecute it, you've got to handle these office actions. There are certain things you've got to do, and you're pretty much told what to do.
Yeah.
When you want to get a registered trademark, you're told by the trademark office, well, you've got to apply. There's going to be some sort of search, and then we'll tell you, and we'll maybe check with other trademark owners and so forth. So there's a process you got to go through. With trade secrets, you've got to do it yourself.
Yes.
And the question that a lot of companies face is they don't know what to do. Well, what does it mean? Well, you've got to look after this stuff. You've got to treat it with tender, loving care. So you've got to think about, well, what information do I have in my company that might qualify? How do I decide whether or not to keep as a trade secret? When I do keep as a trade secret, how do I then limit access? How do I wrap it in protection? How do I ensure it's documented properly? How do I make sure that the rest of the organization knows that this is a trade secret and we can't just publish it or share it with lots of people without thinking about it in advance? So you've got to put your own process in place. And that is really challenging because you've got to suddenly think, well, what does that actually mean? And now, the other thing I would say to people who ask is the situation has changed dramatically.
Yeah.
So 10 years ago, if we were having, if you had approached me to say, Donal, would you do a podcast with me? And we were debating what subjects would we talk about, we would not be thinking about trade secrets.
Correct.
We'd be talking about patents or trademarks or domain names or IP licensing or open source or something like that. But we wouldn't be talking about trade secrets because the law wasn't very strong. If you did steal a trade secret, you got a slap on the wrist. They weren't really taken seriously. But we have seen a dramatic change in trade secrets in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
And it's back to my point about trade secrets. IP in general is complex because things change. And one example is trade secrets. The first change is the law changed. So you saw major jurisdictions updating their trade secret laws. Japan in January 2016, the US in May 2016, Europe in June 2016, and then implemented at the state level in June 2018, China in 2018, and again in 2019. So we've seen Japan, China, Europe, and US all change their trade secret laws.
Yeah.
And the changes are, they first of all tightened up the definition, so it was much clearer to understand what would qualify. They clarified what was meant by misappropriation or theft. The penalties increased. So now, if you get found guilty of stealing a trade secret, in some jurisdictions, you go to prison.
Good.
I mean, while we're talking here today, there are people in prison in the US for trade secret theft. You know, the next to murderers and rapists and terrorists, you've got trade secret infringers.
Yeah.
So suddenly, the law is much more favorable to the trade secret owner. It protects the trade secret owner.
Correct.
You've also seen litigation increase. You've seen a lot more cases, whereas in my early days, I didn't really come across too many trade secret cases, whereas now I'm coming across cases every day.
Yes.
I mean, just yesterday, you saw a case involving IBM.
Yeah.
There was a case in Ireland involving a startup company getting accused together with their investor of doing something with regard to trade secrets, allegedly. So almost every day we're seeing cases. The cases involve either a company going after, for example, a disgruntled employee for stealing a trade secret, a company going after a director or officer, companies going after suppliers or people that they're working with and suddenly falling out. Occasionally companies going after competitors because competitors took an employee and then the employee took trade secrets with them and so forth. We've seen a few cases involving investors. So the type of cases, the number of cases increasing, the types of cases are really intriguing. And you don't necessarily have to even be in the country to find yourself wrapped up in the law. I mean, there's a lot of cases where you've seen non-US companies end up in court in the US in
Correct.
federal court for trade secret theft. Recently we saw Tata Consulting, a big
Yeah.
Indian company, in court in the US for trade secret theft, which is a really interesting case as to how did they get themselves into that difficulty.
Yeah.
I would say there's other reasons why trade secrets are increasing. Companies are embracing collaborative or open forms of innovation, so they're working with other companies. So when you collaborate with somebody else, you typically are sharing some of your valuable confidential information. You're sharing your business plans, your software code, your test scripts. So you're seeing, it's strange to say it, but you're seeing trade secrets and open innovation being linked together. So you don't
Yeah.
normally see the words trade secrets and open innovation together, but actually they're very closely linked.
Yeah.
You also have the issue with trade secrets growing in importance because of the whole issue of the nature of employment. People don't join a company from school and stay there until they retire. People move around a lot more.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, what's happening is on the last day of employment, some people don't worry about having a cake and a coffee and celebrating with their colleagues. They think about stealing trade secrets.
Yeah.
I mean, there's research that shows that, I think it is in America, there was a research that said 40% of employees steal something on the last day of employment. Now, some people steal maybe pens and paper, but some people are stealing trade secrets.
Correct.
Client list, process descriptions, software code, and so forth.
Correct. Correct.
So we're seeing trade secrets go from being ignored 10 years ago to suddenly really interesting.
Yeah.
And if someone, like you said, was to approach me, I'd say, well, here's the definition. Here's what it means a little bit in practice. Here's why you've got to take it seriously.
Correct.
And here's what's changed. And here's what's caused some of those changes.
Correct.
So if you're now a company and you're doing an IP strategy, yes, you've got to still think about patents and trademarks.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But you've also now got to think about trade secrets.
Correct.
And you've got to think about how you're going to do it when it's unregistered.
Yeah. So Donal, here I'll interrupt and ask you, because there are a lot of companies nowadays who work in software domain, and the core idea of working is towards a business method and not particular technical things. So there, in many cases, it is not possible to go ahead with patents and utility patents specifically. So we do advise them that you should focus on trade secrets. You should have strong NDAs, strong agreements with your developers and things like that. So can you tell us few things what companies like these can take care of, especially when they, as you said, like nowadays people transfer from one company to another company a lot. And there may be cases where people hire freelancers and developers outside their organizations. So how can they make sure that whatever product they are developing will stay with the company and nobody is going to steal the product itself and go?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. In the software environment, you do see trade secrets, particularly if it's more business methods, but also if the software is more in the cloud, or let's say it's algorithms or to do with data. Maybe it's a little bit more challenging to treat the user interface as a trade secret, because obviously that's visible to the clients and and Joe public and so forth. But the back end of the software, but also things like before you even get to the actual software code, when you create, for example, your specification documents, your test scripts, your test data, that can also all be treated as a trade secret, because that's valuable information you've spent time developing, and it's valuable to your company. In terms of what companies need to think about doing, clearly have a trade secret policy. Just like you have a health and safety policy or a data privacy policy, have a trade secret policy that outlines your overall approach to trade secrets. Make sure you educate your employees. Yeah. Just like you educate them on how to do software or open source or whatever. Now think about, how well do your employees understand trade secrets? Do they have a basic understanding? Then think about the protections you're going to put in place. So first of all, legal. Have you got good employment contracts? And are there confidentiality provisions or trade secret provisions in employment contracts? If you're using subcontractors, again, have you got good trade secret provisions in those agreements? If you're using third parties of any way to do, for example, if you outsource, for example, maybe testing or something to do with the software, in your agreements with those third parties who are helping you with the software in one way, shape, or form, are there good trade secret provisions in those? Also think about going beyond NDAs. So if you're signing NDAs with other parties, the problem with NDAs is a lot of people treat them like confetti. They don't think about it seriously, but it's a legal agreement.
Correct.
But if I'm going to share my trade secret with you, I would be recommending to go. Yes, we're going to have an NDA, absolutely, because whatever I divulge to you, the secret, I want you to keep secret. But I'm also going to now go beyond it and ask you some basic questions before I share my trade secret with you. So before I give you access to my software code or whatever, do you have a trade secret policy? Do you train your employees about trade secrets? When I entrust my trade secret to you, how are you going to look after it? How are you going to limit access? How are you going to wrap it in protection? So you do see companies, including companies in the software, going what I say beyond NDAs. They still have NDAs, but they're now beginning to ask, just like I would, if I'm using a third party to do some work for me, I might do due diligence to check that they're financially secure, that they're not using, for example, child labor, that they're not doing something illegal. I'm now also beginning to think, when I assess or rate this other company, I'm also now thinking, how good are they looking after trade secrets?
Correct.
And so you got to think about, yes, the agreements, but also doing due diligence. Then you've also got to think about, in the software environment, documenting, making sure that management understands that this aspect of your software are trade secrets. So when you're the IP manager at this company and you're talking about, we have these patents to do with the UI or whatever, and we've got these trademarks, tell management what is now considered trade secret. So the rest of the organization, particularly the directors and officers, understand this stuff is secret. So you need to get a secrecy culture. I know that's challenging because most companies these days talk about an openness culture, but you've got to, in a sense, understand that certain things have to be kept secret. That if we agree that this algorithm is a trade secret, then we limit access. Not everybody in the company is going to have access to this. We can't tomorrow morning publish this on LinkedIn or Twitter. We have to keep it secret. So like I said, I would say policy, education, putting the protection mechanisms in place, the legal frameworks, the technical. Then, for example, if a lot of these trade secrets will obviously be digital, making sure there's encryption or access controls on the network. Going beyond NDAs, if you're dealing with other parties, and of course, in the software world, you can't work as an island. You'll be dealing with subcontractors, third parties, suppliers, customers, clients. So make sure that trade secrets, yet you think about trade secrets in that ecosystem. But if you think about it, I mean, take one famous trade secret in the software world is Google algorithm. The Google algorithm is a trade secret. If I ring up Google tomorrow morning and say, by the way, could I see your algorithm? They'll tell you, go away. They may have patents, but they keep the core of the algorithm is a trade secret.
Correct.
If you think about Facebook, all their data, the data processing they do of all their community, that's a trade secret. If I ring up Facebook and say, by the way, can you share with me all the data you have on all of your users? They'll say, go away. We're not going to share that. Now, individual pieces of it might not be a trade secret, but the entire collection and the processing they do of that data is a trade secret. And I think when we talk about software, we're not just talking about code, we're talking about anything digital. So raw data, algorithms, process data, that can all be a trade secret. And that's very difficult to patent protect. The other thing that's very interesting in the software world is you may have data, you may have negative data. So for example, in the biotech world, we see a lot of examples of companies possessing large amount of failed test data, stuff that doesn't work. Now, you can't get a patent on something that doesn't work. But you can have a trade secret on something that doesn't work. So if you're the only person that knows that this stuff doesn't work and you've got all this test data that proves it, that can be very valuable.
Yeah.
So absolutely, software community or the digital community need to take trade secrets seriously. We do see companies doing it. We also see court cases or litigation cases involving software companies. So it's yeah, absolutely, that needs to be part of their IP strategy, and their in-house people, or if they're working with a law firm, they need to have those discussions with the law firm to make sure they get advice about how to manage those trade secrets. But again, just because it's software, those trade secrets are unregistered, so the software company has to figure out itself how is it going to manage it. And of course, you're sitting in India there, and of course, India is a hotbed for software companies.
Yeah.
So I would suspect that almost all the software companies in India have trade secrets, or rather, they have information which, if they treat it properly, would probably qualify as a trade secret. But
Yes,
whether they're
absolutely.
treating it as a trade secret is another question. Are they thinking about it as a trade secret?
Correct.
Yeah, but they need to. They absolutely need to.
So, Donald, as you were just speaking, there is a very thin line between patents, like what we should uh, write in the patent application and what we shouldn't write in a patent application. So, I think what we shouldn't write in a patent application is the core crux of the secret things that needs to remain in the company, because at the end of the day, the patent application will get published and all the information would be there. So, it's better to keep that core information with the company and disclose to the extent what is required to be
Yeah,
disclosed.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think too many times we think about it's either a patent or a trade secret,
Correct.
but actually, the correct answer is patent and trade secret.
Yes.
So you've got to think about what aspect. So if you're, I mean, there's a famous case. It's a robot that was developed by I think it was Verizon in the US. It was one of the telecom companies.
Yes.
So they built this robot and they were trying to protect it. So what they did is they patented certain aspects, the mechanics and maybe the electronics and the touch sensitivity of the robot. But the software code they kept as a trade secret. So they in a sense looked at the entire innovation and said, well, these aspects are best kept as a trade secret. These aspects over here are best patented. And I think more and more we need to think like that. It's not always it's a patent or a trade secret. Sometimes you got to think, okay, how do I get the best of both worlds? How do I patent certain aspects? And of course, you then got to respect patent law and understand what you have to divulge and so forth. But, you know, particularly if you have let's say a medical device or something like that, which is a combination of mechanics and electronics and software, you can easily say, well, the internal software, that's a trade secret. The sensors or the UI, that's going to be patented. So you can split your system and do it like that so you avail of both worlds. But you have to be careful, obviously.
Absolutely. So another thing that comes up in my mind is, smaller companies, they do not have a lot of capital to invest, and trade secrets, I think they require certain extent of encryptions or technical measures for protection. Like, we need to show that the information is kept as confidential. So
Yeah.
what are the measures which smaller companies, probably companies who are starting up right now, may take so that they can secure their future? Like, in future they'll not have a problem if they have taken some typical measures at the baseline.
Well, in theory, because you don't pay any fees for trade secrets, you could argue that in theory it's free. But obviously, you're right. You're going to spend some money developing your trade secret, and obviously you're going to spend some money protecting it, wrapping legal and technical frameworks. But you don't require your company to become Fort Knox. You just have to take reasonable steps. The biggest challenge for startups or smaller companies I see is they lack this secrecy culture.
Yeah.
So they love being invited to go talk at a seminar and telling everybody about their latest technology.
Yeah.
Or they go to an investor and say, we're looking for some financial capital. And the investor says, well, what do you have? And they tell the investor everything. Or they get an opportunity to go meet with a large multinational like Microsoft or something like that. And Microsoft said, well, what technology do you have? And the four guys or whatever, four girls in the startup company tell everything.
Yeah.
So first of all, you've got to stop that. You've got to absolutely stop that nonsense. You've got to decide If I'm a software company and my algorithm is my trade secret, then under no circumstances am I going to tell anybody my algorithm. I'm
Correct.
going to keep it secret. I'm
Yeah.
going to tell you, yes, I have an algorithm, and I'm going to tell you maybe the algorithm does something. It adds two numbers together very fast, whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to tell you how it does it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Absolutely not. So you've got to, first of all, get a secrecy culture inside your company. And that means you've got to, for example, if you have a small company and the engineers have developed the algorithm, I'm not going to tell the finance manager what the algorithm is because he doesn't need to know. Or I'm not going to tell the CEO what the algorithm is because he doesn't need to know. Or I'm not going to tell. So I'm going to start already limiting access internally.
Yeah.
Secondly, when I do have to tell somebody else, I'm going to absolutely ensure there's legal frameworks. So I'm going to understand NDAs, and I'm not going to treat them like confetti. I'm going to take them very seriously. I'm going to sign NDAs, making sure they're mutual NDAs and making sure the other party understands that they've got to keep stuff secret.
Mm.
I'm also going to start asking obvious questions. So if the larger company comes on knocks on my door and says, "Can you tell me?" I'm going to say, before I tell you anything, how do you look after trade secrets that I give to you?
Yeah.
Do you have a trade secret policy? Do you educate your people? When I give you my trade secret, how are you going to look after it? Because you're a big company, and it's very easy for you later on to forget that it's my trade secret. And in a couple of years' time, you'll think it's your trade secret.
Yeah.
So before I share it, I'm going to start being tough. And if the other party says, we don't have a trade secret policy, or I'm not quite sure how I'm going to look after your trade secret, then I'm not going to share my trade secret with you. Why would I share my trade secret with you if you can't even look after it?
Mm.
So you've got to get this secrecy culture into your company. And you've got to stop doing stupid things like going to seminars and telling about it, or going to investor meetings and telling everything. You've got to decide this stuff is secret. And I've got to think the same way as Facebook thinks about their data set or Google thinks about their algorithm. Yes, Google tell you they have an algorithm, but they won't tell you what it is. Facebook tells you they have data, but they won't give it to you. So if I'm a smaller company, I've got to get this into my DNA. I've got to start realizing that trade secrets aren't just a legal or technical issue. It's a cultural issue. And that's the problem I see with smaller companies. They don't understand that it's a fragile asset. Once I've told you what it is, it's gone. It's like the genie in the bottle. Once the genie comes out of the bottle, you can't put him back in. So you can't decide to have a trade secret on Monday, tell everybody about it on Tuesday, and then change your mind on Wednesday and say, no, I want to go back treating it as a trade secret. It's gone.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it's a very different form of IP. It can be very protective and it can be very valuable, but it's fragile. And you've got to think about it like a fragile asset. It's like having a very valuable vase or ornament that's easily broken. Well, you wouldn't just leave it on the table so that somebody could knock it over. You know, if I said to you, here's a really ancient vase from ancient Indian culture, it's worth a fortune.
Yeah.
You'd look after it. You'd make sure it's wrapped in protection. You'd make sure that people can't just walk by and knock it over with their elbow, or you wouldn't put it on some sort of table that's not very stable. You'd say, this is a very valuable vase. It's from, the 800 AD. It's from an ancient time. It's really valuable to our culture, to our country, to our history. You would treat it with tender, loving care. You've got to think the same about your trade secrets. You've got to treat them with tender, loving care.
Absolutely. I now these words have imprinted in my mind that we need to take care of trade secrets with tender love and care. I think people do not understand it. And as you rightly said, we have so many startup shows, investor summits. People look for opportunity to get investments, and in that high or in that zone of getting investments, they'll end up disclosing everything to people around them, which I think is not a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing to think about trade secrets is, where are your risks coming from?
Correct.
Now, unfortunately, with trade secrets, the risks are usually quite close to home.
Yeah.
So, yes, there's always the danger that some hacker in North Korea will steal your trade secret. There is that risk.
Yeah.
But to be honest, I'm not so worried there. I'm worried more about your own employees,
Correct.
your own directors and officers, your subcontractors, your friends, your suppliers, your clients, your customers. They're the people I'm most worried about.
Yes.
Because what we notice when things go wrong with trade secrets, that's where the incident happens.
Yes.
So when you look at cases, often it's your supplier does something that you didn't expect them to do with your trade secret, or your customer does something that you say, no, you're not allowed to do that. And often, sometimes it's deliberate. Sometimes, though, it's completely due to lack of information.
Correct.
It's not understanding that this is a really valuable vase and I've got to look after it. And if I give the vase to you, I've got to then check, are you going to also understand that I've given you something really valuable? You've got to protect it. And so the risk profile, with patents, usually the risk is your competitor or some non-practice. It's somebody outside your company, although you can have patent risks internally with inventor disputes or whatever. So your own people can do things to mess up your patents. But in general, when you think about patents, you're thinking about your competition. With trade secrets, I would suggest be a little paranoid about the people closer to you, because they can do things to really mess you up.
And it messes you internally as well. Like the emotions also are generally present in the trade secret scenarios. Either in most of the cases, what we have seen, or in my experience, what I have seen is there's some employees stealing some information, going to other company, giving them that information and things like that.
Just illustrate the point. So I have a software part of my company where we develop IP tools. So there are about half a dozen people in my company. So there are 2 or 3 developers. So I'm the boss, I suppose, of the company, but I do not have access to the source code. So my company, I'm not allowed to access the source code. We made that decision when we started. We said, no. Why do I need to access the source code? Why do I need to? I know that it's there somewhere. It's locked away. It's secure. But I don't need to have access to the source code, because I'm on LinkedIn, I'm talking at events and so forth. I have my computer with me and so forth. There's always the danger I would do something like leave my computer on the train or tell some. So we decided I do not need to have access to that valuable trade secret. And that's what you need to think about. Who needs to have access to the valuable asset, and then limit access? Because in my case, I like to talk and I like to present and so forth. I could always accidentally share it, and I don't want to make that mistake. So you've got to think like that. You've got to think about access controls. You've got to think about limiting access. You've got to think about the risks internally, the risks with your friends, your suppliers. You've got to think a little bit differently when it comes to trade secrets.
Donal, any interesting situation or case you would like to share on which probably what you have heard or you have worked on? Any interesting case to which our audience can relate to?
Well, just a couple of wrap-up points. One is that there are a number of companies now, obviously, because of the law changes and so forth, beginning to take trade secrets very seriously. However, one lesson we've learned is that becoming good at trade secrets isn't like switching a light switch where yesterday you were bad at it and today you're good. This is actually a journey. It takes time. It takes time to change your company to really embrace trade secrets and be good at trade secret management. And what we're noticing is taking some companies months, if not years, to go from being really poor at it to being really good. So this is a journey. And I think that's something you need to take away. The second thing that people need to start thinking about is no company is an island, and your company, in a sense, the agreements you sign with others, with your employees, your subcontractors, your suppliers, that's part of your foundations. And you've got to start thinking about your agreements from a trade secret perspective. What does it say about confidentiality? What have I actually agreed to do or not do with business information.
Yeah.
I mentioned about Tata being involved in a US case recently. And it's a really interesting case as to how they got themselves into that difficulty. So the case involved, so it's a software company in America called Epic Healthcare that
Yeah.
make medical records for hospitals. So you have your patient data on a computer system as opposed to being on paper files. And they had a deal with a hospital in Portland, Oregon, in the west of the US, to supply the hospital with their software. Now, Epic Healthcare are not a big company, so they outsourced the installation and configuration of the software to Tata Consulting, an Indian company.
Yeah.
So they said to Tata, we have the software. You're going to take our software and install it in that hospital, make sure it's up and running, make sure the operators know how to use it, and so forth. And that's what happened. So Epic got help from Tata. Tata installed it. The hospital ended up with a new system. So you'd say, great story. What's the problem? The problem was the agreements.
Yeah.
So Epic Healthcare, before they gave the software details to Tata, had an agreement with them. And it basically said, we're going to give you some of our trade secrets to allow you to install the software. You must limit access to only those engineers who are going to be working at the hospital. At the end of the project, you must destroy all our trade secrets. You can't keep them. Tata didn't do that. And they ended up in trade secret case in US. Originally $940 million, I think it was reduced to about 470 million on appeal. So the problem was that you've got to understand the link between trade secrets and the agreements. And that's what's happening more and more. We're seeing that people are treating agreements like as if when you sign the agreement, I can put it in a filing cabinet. I don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yes.
No, you've got to understand, what have I agreed? What have I agreed to do? And in this case, I agreed to limit access to the trade secret, and I agreed to destroy the trade secrets after the project.
Yeah.
So I would say, take agreements, even NDAs, which are one of the most basic agreements you can have, take them a lot more seriously, because we see a lot of companies treat them like confetti. They think it's, I've just signed it. No, come on. I don't worry about it anymore. No. What have you agreed to do? Remember, if you sign an NDA, it means that in the days or weeks after the NDA, you're likely sharing your trade secrets with somebody else, or they're sharing their trade secrets with you. Because if you're not going to share trade secrets, why have you signed an NDA? Okay. You don't sign an NDA if you're going to share stuff that's public. So an NDA is warning you that you're about to start sharing trade secrets.
Absolutely, Donal. I was laughing because I tell this information to so many clients that you should take your NDAs seriously, specifically when they have some kind of misappropriate clauses in the NDA, and they think like, oh, it is just an NDA, we can just sign it and give it to the person, and next time if this happens, I'll hold their hand, bring them to you, that you explain the
they've got to when you think about it, your agreements are part of the foundations of the company. They're defining how you're going to operate with others, and they have to be much better appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Donal, we discussed about the trade secret a lot and in deep, and now it's time to know you and some questions for you personally.
Okay.
So, what are 3 things you're grateful for?
Well, first of all, I'm grateful that my family, my son had been ill a long time ago, very seriously ill, and I sort of fell off the planet a while, thinking that was the end of life and everything. And he's now 20 years of age. His birthday was yesterday, and I look back and I remember a dark time in my life when I didn't think he'd be around. So I'm extremely grateful that my son is still here. Secondly, I suppose I'm very grateful that I have a nice network in my business. People who are willing to advise me, give me advice, give me help and support. Because when you have your own business, So I came from a large multinational, set up my own company. And when you have your own company, it's your own baby, and it's you've got to do an awful lot of work to make it successful. And a lot of things can go wrong. So I realized that my company has survived mainly because of others. You know, I've got great people working for me. I've got great students who came during the summer months and did some internships with me. I've got good customers. I've got advisors. So I'm really grateful the fact that my company has survived for 13 years now. But it's thanks to help from others. And you know, I hate hearing sometimes when you have, you know, entrepreneurs stand up and they talk about what they did. And I'm thinking, no, no, no. You probably only survived because others helped you.
Yes,
You know,
absolutely.
and I'm very grateful of the help that I've gotten from others. Even some competitors have helped me. So so yeah, yeah, I think that is as that's good. The third thing. Well, it started raining in the UK today, and we've now I know you guys in India will probably laugh at us and thinking, what the hell are you complaining about, you know, with your hot weather? But we're not geared to handle hot weather in the UK. I mean, we've had a summer of the temperature being between 30 and 40 degrees for weeks now, and we're just not set up for it. We expect to have rain and wind and a bit of cold, and it's a sharp warning that the world is changing. Unfortunately, I mean, we clearly have to wake up that something is amiss. But it rained today here where I live. We haven't had rain in weeks. My flowers are dead in the garden. My grass is brown and everything. So I woke up this morning. I was thinking, yes, it rained. So I suppose it's a warning message that and we don't have it. We complain in the UK, but I appreciate, you know, there are parts of India that are probably having it much worse in terms of drought and weather, and other parts of the world are suffering. So I am grateful it rained today. I was delighted. I woke up thinking, yes, water on the ground. So that's my third gratefulness.
Beautiful, beautiful. So, Donal, now two traits that you think are useful for a professional career.
um, the best thing that I ever did in my career was occasionally move sideways. Let me explain that. Too often when we talk about careers, we only talk about the incremental steps up that people take. You know, you start off an engineer, then you were a project manager, then maybe you were an R&D manager, then you were VP of R&D. We often talk about the career moves going upwards. I'm now more senior. I have more responsibility. I have more salary, whatever. But actually, I would advise people that actually occasionally move sideways. So the best thing that happened to me was occasionally I was moved sideways. So I was an engineer in the UK. When I first was a low engineer, I was a junior engineer in a department. There were lots of senior engineers. And one day the boss had a meeting. He said, we have a new factory in Hong Kong. Actually, no, it was up in Yonglong in China. And he said, the factory have some new equipment there to be really useful if we had some engineers there. And we know this stuff here well. Does any engineer want to go and spend some time in China? Now, I wasn't going to put my hand up because I was the junior engineer. So the senior engineers were talking first of all, but some guy was married. One guy had his wife was expecting a baby. One guy didn't have a passport. So then they turned to me because the others had said, no, I don't want to go. Yeah, yeah. They turned to me and said, well, Donald, would you go? Would you like to move out of engineering and move into a factory for probably about 3 months, I think I spent there, maybe a little bit longer. And I put my hand up. I said, yes, because I was single. I was saying, hang on, I've never been to that part of the world. So I spent a couple of months working in a factory. But it was the best experience because when you're an engineer in a lab, I mean, we had nice desks, we had nice tables, nice equipment. We were in this factory. We had sawdust on the ground. It was dirty, it was noisy. But suddenly I had to understand, okay, how do you get things to work in that type of environment? So one move I made sideways is I moved out of R&D into a factory for a while. And I always look back and say, actually, I became a better engineer having experienced what it was like to work in that environment. And then obviously I moved sideways from engineering to IP. And I remember talking to one of my colleagues, and he was saying, I was thinking, I'm a bit nervous about moving from R&D environment to an IP environment. I mean, you guys are all lawyers, and he said, no, come across. He said, there's some really interesting stuff happening in the world of IP. So my advice to people in careers is don't always be focused on moving up.
Yeah.
Because you can get a lot of experience and knowledge and competencies by moving out of your comfort zone into an area. So moving from R&D to a factory, moving to a service center, moving into marketing, you get different skills. And I think that is something to think about in a career development.
Absolutely, rightly said. I think if I see my journey now, I can relate to it because first it was engineering, then law, then entrepreneurship mixed with marketing and things like that. And I think it is inbuilt that we gain happiness as we grow as a person as well. And for that, it's important, like not a direct a simple ladder we can come travel from one position to next, but
Yeah.
sideways as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Donal, one aspiration you have for the future?
In the business, I mean, in our business, we're very European centric. We have a few clients in Asia and in America, but one of our hopes is to grow in America. Now that's challenging because we're not based there. We're a couple of time zones away, so we're having to think about, okay, how do you grow a business in an area where you're not present? How do you forge links? How do you understand the culture and so forth? So one aspiration in our business is to grow the business in the US, and we're having to think smart. We're thinking, okay, how do you do it when you're very far away? How are we going to do it? How are we going to do it directly, indirectly? Are we going to forge alliances or whatever? So that's one aspiration from the business. I suppose one aspect is business as well. We have some junior people in the company. I hope to see their careers grow and develop and really see them blossom in the future. I'm very fascinated with this whole idea of IP education and e-learning. So one of the things we are really interested in is how do we become much better at IP education, at educating non-IP people about this complex subject matter? Because, like I said at the very beginning, I don't think we're doing a great job at the moment. I think we're not doing the basics well. So when there is an education session, we're not doing the preparation, we're not doing the content delivery, we're not doing the follow-up. So I think that we've got to think about how do we embrace technology like e-learning to really transform people's understanding of IP. So that's more a larger, and I'm working with a few other companies in that regard as well to say, because I don't think it's one company can do it on their own. I think we've got to combine forces to get IP education to a much better place, because we're not doing it well. We need to improve it.
I think it's need of the hour that we need to spread education to all the people who are going to be the future leaders of the company and who are going to start with their professional careers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Donal, any final thoughts you want to share with our audience before we conclude the podcast?
No, I think, sorry for my rambling. Hopefully it's made sense. Hopefully my strong Irish accent hasn't confused people. I just want to thank you for inviting me. And I totally enjoyed the Q&A. And if people have questions, obviously come via Priggya, come via me, come via you to me if they have something they want me to clarify. I'm active on LinkedIn, so I'm very happy to connect to people on LinkedIn platform. But no, thank you very much, and look forward to see what type of reaction you get when this goes live.
Thank you so much, Donal. It was absolutely a full lesson, a session full of learning, and I myself got to learn so many things from you. Thank you so much for your time and your willingness to share.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey there, thank you for attending today's session. If you enjoyed today's session, do follow our channel and consider sharing it with a friend. My name is Priggya Arora, daughter of inspiring parents, alumna of IIT Kharagpur, engineer turned lawyer and entrepreneur, and now founder of PA Legal, where we help creators and innovators protect their intellectual property. Thank you.